The Oran Operation.
I've heard some of your people complain about the Senate, and let me tell you, they do not know how good they have it.
Latomsula quirked an eyebrow.
They should try dealing with a Salt Lord.
Grayan shook her head.
If we were trying this back on the shore, every time we suggested building a bridge to help move armies, some Salt Lord would look at the weirwood we needed and suggest building another navy instead. So we end up with shitty bridges that keep falling down, and then everybody just falls back onto ferries and boats, and it's the soldiers that get shafted, because they have to pay the boat owners for the privilege of getting to where the war is. And of course, if we don't pay, the Grendel blame the landbound. And anyway, it's a nightmare.
Wait, aren't you Grendel, Grayan? Latomsula's tone was mild, but she was very interested in the answer. The orc sighed.
It depends who you ask, she said bitterly. We called ourselves Grendel, I mean.
The engineer shot the prognosticator a quick look from under furrowed brows.
We're the protectorate of Morayas now, obviously.
Obviously, nodded Latomsula. The protectorate was probably a political fiction, but it was difficult to be entirely sure of that, which made exchanges like this fascinating to the Varushkan.
We called ourselves Grendel, but the commander, he is a soldier, not a sailor. There are people on the shore who think you're only a real Grendel if you own a boat, or sail on a boat, or build boats, or soldiering is what the Septs do. No true Grendel and so on, you know?
Latomsula wasn't sure she did know, but nodded sympathetically nonetheless.
It must be quite frustrating,
she said encouragingly. It was rare for the normally taciturn protectorate orcs to speak so candidly, and she wanted to get the most out of it.
Not that the Empire's much better,
Grayan added hastily.
So many people in the mix means everything takes forever. When a Salt Lord decides they want something, they just do it. Not much time for arguing and voting and all this thing with your priests. The Septs are the same. As long as they come when the Salt Lords call, they're pretty much left alone to get on with it in their lands.
The orc stared off into the distance, clearly seeing something other than the marshy northern bank of the Scorio.
It's the army that wins the wars,
she said, half to herself.
It's the soldiers that die in the mud, die with swords in their hands. The Mordium have it better. Fair enough. Only because they fought tooth and nail for their recognition. And when you're locked away down by a bunch of Urizen sentinels, you can't just sail away. It wasn't the damned sailors that died at Solon's Doubt, let me tell you.
Grayan shook herself and straightened up. She raised her spyglass, studying the shores of the Sirok Bayou.
Anyway, I'm sure things aren't all coffee and cream in the Imperial armies either. It's a soldier's lot to slog over hot sand and spill blood because some silk-wearing arsehole 500 miles away tells them to. The soldier's lot is to fight and die, to fall on sands and never know why.
Latomsula wondered who she was quoting. The uncomfortable silence stretched, becoming more awkward. Grayan broke it.
Right. See that? I mean, obviously you can't see that because I have the spyglass, but trust me, the road there, it's a bit battered, but I think it'd be easier to bank and shore it than to try building a new one. Most of the stone is still there, it's just under the mud. Wide enough for 2 wagons, I'd judge. So, if the bridge makes landfall there, it'll link your trade routes quite nicely.
Latomsula let the talk of salvage, stone and swamps wash over her, making a mental note to send a note about this exchange to Gerard once they were back in Oran. Overview. In autumn 386 YE, As part of the solution to the incursion of the dry patricians, the river Scorio was infused along its length with spring magic, resulting in violent flooding. The damage caused by the withering presence of the patricians was washed away, and when the water subsided, Madruga was transfigured. The gentle farmlands of the south and west were replaced with marsh and haunted grass, Crucible, Siroc Bayou, and quiet grasses. In the process, the bridges crossing the river were swept away. Only the Sorble Bridge, north of the eponymous town, survived. Last season, the Senate accepted an offer from the Protectorate of Morayas to work with their military engineers. They would apply their expertise to the challenge of creating new bridges to reconnect the eastern Brass Coast and restore easy movement between Feroz and Madruga. This project is also of interest to the Iron Confederacy, whose merchants use the pass along the eastern coast road via Bramar to reach the wider empire. Latomsula Nigoslava was selected to lead the appraisal and liaise with the Protectorate. The project definitely does not play to her strengths as a magician who seeks magical solutions to problems, but her familiarity with the magical strangeness of the Siroc Bayou may be useful. Her main contribution, however, comes from her understanding of the Imperial civil service and bureaucracy, and smoothing interactions between the Protectorate engineers and the people of the Brass Coast. Bridges. Bridging the Scorio between Feroz and Madruga is challenging because the river has become so tumultuous. Building in the Siroc Bayou or Crucible is difficult because of the marshy terrain. Siroc Bayou and Crucible are not under Imperial control. The main challenge in bridging the Scorio is that the wild river has become even more dangerous since the powerful ritual that caused it to flood the wasteland created by the Dry Patricians. Its waters are impregnated with ilium that flows down from the Karaman peaks. Star metal, in sufficient concentration, is known to have unexpected effects on magical enchantments, or curses, often causing them to linger considerably longer than expected. The Bay of Oran, the wide waters between Feroz and Madruga into which the Scorio empties, is nowhere near as wild, but is by no means untouched by the strangeness of the West. There is talk of maps of swampweed, entangled with bright yellow flowers that seem to move against the tides, their long fronds trailing deep into the waters like floral jellyfish, reports of peculiar coloured and inquisitive shoalsfish, distressingly large crabs, and gulls who stare at sailors in a way that makes them uncomfortable. So far, these phenomena haven't caused any problems, but the folk of northern Feroz have learned to be a little pessimistic about such things. The other problem is that the northern banks of the Scorio are now trackless marshland. The roads that used to run along the Scorio and cross the Sorble Bridge were washed away by the magically spreading waters. Until this very season, the Bayou and Crucible were wild and untamed lands that were not even officially a part of the Empire. The Redwind Corsairs launched a daring raid into the Bayou to bring it under Imperial control, but there is still much work to be done. Bridging over troubled water. The Protectorate engineers have examined the situation and put together a proposal to build a bridge near Oran. The first step for the Protectorate is to make a proper assessment of the river, on both banks. Latomsula secures freeborn assistance, hiring a couple of boats for the use of the Orc engineers. A recent statement in the Freeborn Assembly by Maliki fell just short of the greater majority it needed to be widely distributed, but in the absence of any encouragement not to deal with the Protectorate, the traditional freeborn entrepreneurialism seems to be taking precedence, especially given the Senate decision to accept Commander Gallam's offer to restore the Spice Gardens of Feroz to freeborn control. There is little excitement when the engineers run across patrols from the Redwind Corsairs. Soldiers on both sides have grudges against their former enemies, but the experienced prognosticator is able to defuse the situation with some careful diplomacy and Varushkan honey wine. It takes a couple of weeks, but the assessment is completed, and the true extent of the challenge is made clear. Bridging the wild Scorio itself, with a magical marsh on the northern bank, is likely to prove infeasible. It would also need a new road to be built along the northern banks of the river, through the shifting marshes. Instead, the engineers propose building a long road bridge across the western end of the bay, downstream from where the wild river empties into the sea. One end would be anchored near Oran, the other on the coast east of where the city of Sirok once stood. The bridge would employ Grendel techniques for crossing deep water using caissons. A frame of weirwood reinforced with mithril is constructed, and pumps mounted on pontoons are used to remove the water from within the frame, which is then filled with a mixture of cement, aggregate, mithril, and steel rods, and a white granite core. This creates a line of stable pylons upon which a road can run. Mother of Invention. A bridge across the Bay of Oran would be expensive. The Protectorate engineers are adept at repurposing existing architecture to create new structures. With Senate permission, they can salvage the Salt Guard or the Temple of Barlow and the Black Bull to reduce the costs of the bridge project. The project will require 50 wains of white granite, 15 wains of mithril, and 15 wains of weirwood. Normally, the labour costs would be significant, especially given one end of the bridge terminates in a marsh, but there is no shortage of cheap labour in impoverished Faroz. As such, the final cost of the project would be a mere 96 crowns, even taking into account the difficulties of working with the marshland. Work would take 6 months to complete. Once the bridge was completed, it would once again be possible to move armies directly from Sirok Bayou to Oran Seri. The position the Protectorate engineers have assessed incorporates the remnants of the white granite road that once ran along the northern banks of the Scorio into Segura. This means the bridge also restores connections vital to overland trade between Feroz and Madruga, and by extension, the Iron Confederacy and the Empire. This would be a major boon to the Paradors and other businesses in the town of Oran, allowing them to reclaim at least a fragment of their former glory, removing the impoverished quality from Oran Seri. Another positive is the roads of Feroz are still relatively intact. Even Rahab wasn't stupid and greedy enough to destroy the arteries that allow his soldiers, and the wealth of the Brass Coast, to flow across the territory. Thanks to the road running between Oran and Keradavo, once Imperial merchants were able to cross from Madruga into Feroz freely, it would reconnect the sunset roads, restoring Segura to the prosperity that was lost when the Scorio broke its banks. Unfortunately, they won't help Feroz. At least not at the moment, given the impoverished and abandoned state of the territory. Latomsula also believes it could be a potent symbol of Feroz's reconnection to the wider empire, literally and metaphorically building bridges between the southwestern empire and the heartlands. There is still some way to go before Feroz recovers anything like its former prosperity, but along with the recently completed Wharfage of Oran, it represents progress towards recovering from the ruin left by Governor Rahab. The sheer cost of the project appears daunting, but the Protectorate engineers have a pragmatic proposal. As former Grendel soldiers, they are adept at scavenging and repurposing materials to meet their strategic goals. Latomsula reports that there is a degree of bitterness from the orcs, although they try to hide it when they speak of this need for salvage. Reading between the lines and asking some carefully probing questions, it appears that units such as Commander Gallums are constantly underfunded and undersupplied by the Salt Lords. Most of the armies of the Broken Shore are supported by their septs, those that do not have to skimp and save. It seems that there is significant rivalry between professional soldiers, such as Gallum, and the naval officers who receive the lion's share of the support from the Salt Lords. Necessity being the mother of invention, it has given the engineers of the Protectorate a keen eye for opportunities to repurpose existing materials. Ruins and salt. Protectorate engineers could salvage the flooded ruins of the Salt Guard to reduce the amount of white granite required. It would increase the labour cost by 80 crowns. There is a risk of angry spirits. The ruins of Sirok are drowned in the mud of the marshlands and the waters of the bayou. By employing divers and salvagers, some of the materials used to build the Salt Guard could be repurposed to help build the caissons. This would involve recruiting and organising teams to break the stone and transport it to where it could be added to the massive labour project. Again, the hunger for paying work of the people of Feroz would play into the Empire's hands here. Latomsula looks at the engineers' proposals and estimates that a further 80 crowns in labour costs would allow the ruined Salt Guard to be salvaged. This would effectively provide 15 wains of white granite towards the construction of the bridge. There are risks, however. A lot of people died in the fall of the Salt Guard. Freeborn, Commonwealth, Grendel, and Assavean remains still lie in the flooded ruins. As a Varushkan, La Tomsula knows better than most the dangers of disturbing a burial ground, and with the Isle of Aseni no longer attracting and containing the spirits of those lost at sea, there is a chance that salvaging the Salt Guard in this fashion will incur the wrath of the dead. There are not believed to be any ghosts haunting the ruins of Siroc at the moment, but salvaging the Salt Guard might be one way to change that. La Tomsula has looked at the risk separately and believes that a drop of prevention will remove the need for an entire bucket-load of cure. If this mandate is passed, then the salvage of the Salt Guard will proceed without incident. It must be passed and enacted at the summer solstice, as with any mandate, but even if the commission of the Oran Bridge is delayed, it will still have full effect. If the named priest is the High Exorcist, the custodian of the Imperial War Memorial, the master of the School of Exorcism, Inez y Azulma y Ergo, who was the only one to support the garrison when it fell, or the former Justicia of Aseni, Maria y Espiri y Guerrera, then the liar required for the mandate is reduced to 50. It is not common for a mandate to name someone who is not part of the assembly, but in each case, the title in question is empowered to deal with the restless spirits, and able to bring additional resources to bear on this problem. If the mandate is not enacted, then salvaging the Salt Guard will result in some ghostly troubles in the Bay of Oran. The mandate can be raised in either the Freeborn National Assembly or the Assembly of the Way, and both could be upheld and enacted. In this case, it would mean a very large number of exorcists, ghost whisperers, and occultists will descend upon the Bay of Oran. Foam and the Bull. The Temple of Barlow and the Black Bull has been abandoned. Protectorate engineers could be permitted to salvage the temple to reduce the amount of weirwood and mithril required. Doing so raises the labour cost by a further 45 crowns. Since the liberation of Oran and the surrender of the priests serving at the Temple of Barlow and the Black Bull, the structure has stood empty. Constructed by the Assaveans nearly a decade ago, the place has always been controversial. During the occupation of the Grendel, though, it served as something of a place of sanctuary for freeborn friendly to the priests and operated a covert way for those fleeing the grasp of Governor Rahab to reach safety in Madruga. The governor could not afford to risk angering the Assavean priests, and they used that protection to help many freeborn evade the cruel tyrant's grasp. Since the repatriation of the priests, the temple has stood empty. The proposal from the engineers is that unless the Empire is planning to convert it to some other use, it could be torn down to support the bridge building effort. There's some white granite available, although nowhere near as much as there is in the drowned fortification. But more importantly, the gardens that once surrounded the temple incorporated wains of weirwood, and the roof is partially supported by mithril bars. A second team could rip the building apart to get at some of the materials inside and contribute them to the building effort. It would increase the labour cost of the project by a further 45 crowns, but provide 5 wains of weirwood and mithril for the production. Tearing down the temple is somewhat controversial. In theory, the building is the legal property of the Assaveans, but since the Empire is currently at war with them, there are no legal obstacles to the action. And most freeborn who remember the sack of Siroc by the Assavean forces see the destruction of this heretical and blasphemous temple as right and proper. However, the Kanza family, who only evade capture due to the Temple of Barlow and the Black Bull, protest that this is a poor way for the freeborn to repay the priests for the risk they took to shelter the helpless from the Grendel. Fair prices. The labour costs for the bridge are very low thanks to the impoverished quality of Feroz. The Commission may instruct the civil service to pay higher wages to the labourers recruited. At the moment, the impoverished nature of Feroz means that any commission built in, or partially in, the territory benefits significantly from reduced labour costs. The people of Feroz are poor, and desperate enough to work for a fraction of the wages of what citizens elsewhere might demand for their labour. Perhaps inspired by the judgment from Ravane Notes during the winter solstice 386 YE, there are some who question the prosperity of the situation. Constructing Cassians is dangerous, back-breaking work after all. Is it right for the wealthy citizens of Anvil to take advantage of the people of Feroz by paying less than the work is normally worth? There is nothing to stop whoever commissions the bridge from stipulating that everyone employed receive the standard payment for working the bridge. If this were done, the labour costs for the bridge would increase from 96 crowns to 288 crowns. This increase would not have any game effect, but it would at least send a clear message to the freeborn and the prosperous folk across the Empire that the construction was not taking advantage of the reduced circumstances of those living in Feroz. Taking a toll. The Protectorate has included plans for a toll house at either end of the bridge. It is up to the Commissioner whether to include this title. The final element the Protectorate includes in its proposal is included as a matter of course, provision for the toll keepers to live near and control access to the bridge. The engineers are actually surprised when Latomsula points out that this is not standard practice for Imperial commissions. Apparently almost nothing big gets built on the broken shore unless someone, somewhere, sees an opportunity to increase their wealth, prestige, or influence. The engineers just assume the Empire would appoint someone to maintain the bridge, and gouge a healthy income from those who need to pay to use it. After all, anyone who doesn't want to pay for the only bridge connecting Feroz to Madruga could still take the long way round, to Segura, or hire a boat to ferry them across. This in itself, however, presents a reason not to incorporate the toll gates. The bridge has a greater symbolic meaning. Building it would restore the direct connection between Feroz and the rest of the Brass Coast. It would make the nation whole again. Local merchants and travellers won't balk at paying to use the bridge. More than any other nation, the freeborn are accustomed to paying for things. However, a toll would inevitably mean less traffic on the bridge. Charging freeborn citizens to move from Feroz to Madruga means that the two territories will remain separated by the river and the tolls that are needed to pay to cross it. It won't have a measurable effect, but it will mean the gap between Feroz and Madruga becomes a permanent divide. After careful consideration, Latomsula leaves it in place. She points to the inspiration of the Spider's Tollkeep as one way an expensive bridge might be made a more appealing prospect. Whoever commissions the bridge may choose to stipulate that it will be a toll bridge and create the title of Oran Tollkeep. This would be a sinecure that receives a portion of the tolls collected from merchants passing over the bridge, and in return would be responsible for ensuring the bridge is maintained and properly protected when necessary. Latomsula calculates that it would provide an initial income of 10 crowns each season, but if the impoverished qualities were removed from Morias, then it would increase the income by another 6 crowns a season. The Commission could choose to have the title appointed by the Brass Coast Senators, with or without tenure. Alternatively, the Commission could specify that the position be appointed by the tally of the votes. In either case, it would need to be a freeborn national position. The Adamant Connection. Latomsula proposes speaking to Adamant about making the bridge particularly sturdy. Latomsula doesn't have a great deal of work to do with the bridges. She is at her best when dealing with magical matters, and the Protectorate engineers only use mundane methods in their proposal. However, after some discussion with the freeborn magicians at the Parador of Salt and Sand, and following her own work with bridges in Madruga, the prognosticator does have a proposal of her own. The design of the bridge is sturdy enough to weather storms or endure all but the most concerted efforts to damage it from hostile forces. With the aid of the Eternal, King under the Mountain, however, it would be possible to ensure the bridge stands despite anything wreckers might throw at it. The Koboldi of the Stone Dragon could add their own expertise and infuse portions of the structure with adamant. The Eternal would need to be petitioned for their help before construction began, and doing so would fall on the Archmage of Summer. But Latomsula has no doubt that Shiraz of the Granite Throne would be amenable to assisting if requested as part of a formal plenipotentiary. Inkworks. The Inkworks of Jorah opportunity is available until the end of the autumn equinox 388 YE. Latomsula's colleague, Graciana y Lopez y Guerrera, has already reviewed the proposed Inkworks of Johora in her recent assessment of Imperial ministries. Latomsula notes that if the Oran Bridge were built and removed the impoverished quality from Aran Seri, then there would still be value in building the Inkworks. Instead of removing the impoverished condition in conjunction with the bridge, it would remove the abandoned quality from the region, bringing in a new wave of settlers. The same would be true if the commission were completed in the other order. Between them, they would remove both qualities.